Let's talk with someone very familiar with the military. He takes us further in depth. This is retired Master Sergeant Scott Neal, who spent a good bit of time with the Special Forces. Scott, Skyping in from Tampa this morning. As always, we appreciate your time. Now, you, part of the proverbial boots on the ground, albeit in a Special Forces role. What do you make of this difference? First, Secretary Kerry last week saying, this is counterterrorism. Then you have the Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough, yesterday on the Sunday show saying, no, it's a war. And John Kerry doubling back. Was there a political reluctance for that based on then candidate Obama saying he would get us out of foreign wars?
Well, I believe so. And really, to the soldiers who already are on the ground, they're not watching this debate, but what they're feeling is the effects of support that may support them. And it's unfortunate that America can't be decisive exactly when the world is looking at us to be decisive.
Well, let's talk some more about decisiveness, because in the past, and obviously you've been involved in Special Forces, but one of the seemingly universal laments for many of our fighting men and women has been a notion of rules of engagement that essentially tied their hands. So if we're getting this type of thing, indeed there were reports that this president, reminiscent of Lyndon Johnson, was taking a look at targets for our air support on the ground, and that conjures up disturbing images of what went on with Vietnam and LBJ. Do you worry that on one hand we will see our Special Forces or whomever we send in really have a tight prescription on what they can do with rules of engagement that put them at a disadvantage?
Well, you can certainly see that already. And Special Forces has already been on the ground for several months now and have been effective when they've been unimpeded. But when you actually handcuff them and talk them about, rules of engagement that actually looks at the political considerations, not the effects you want on the ground, you're just hampering the success of the mission that you gave them in the first place.
And how do you think Britain is going to react now of this latest beheading? Do you think that they're going to help and join in on these airstrikes? They've said they weren't going to before. This is before the beheading, though.
Well, I think they're going to have to. It's a sense of national pride. I mean, this group has really gone unimpeded. The leaders of the world right now are very indecisive in what can Britain contribute. They can contribute SAS, just like the American Special Forces. They can contribute some air power. We have blended technology and procedures so we can interact pretty easy. It's just having the decision and moving forward with it.
And even as we talk about alliances, for years, Scott, you have been advocating a type of interagency task force. Are we any closer to that today because of the nature of what has arisen here with ISIS?
Well, what you're seeing now, and it happened all the way back in 2006, 2007, when we determined our current structure as a fighting force, as a country tackling this issue was not focused. So there was a strategic interagency task force that was assembled, and their sole focus was foreign fighters. And that's when you had that very deliberate policy, that very deliberate strategy. You had laws that were enacted. You had your law enforcement partners that came in, and you had your foreign partners that came in, and they all sat together every day and looked at this problem.
So how effective do you think Kerry will be? He's trying to form this international coalition. How effective do you think he'll be at actually achieving that?
Well, I think, everybody's waiting at the bus stop, waiting for everybody to get on, when you just need to be a natural leader and start moving out. And when you start demonstrating those successes, which we're going to launch anyways, you need to already have momentum and underway. But just sitting around the bus stop, hoping everybody gets on the bus with you is not going to be effective at all.
Scott, I made reference to White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough a little bit earlier. As I mentioned, he was on the Sunday shows this weekend. Let's listen again to what he said about who should be fighting the fight against ISIS, and then we'll get a reaction. This clip coming courtesy of CNN State of the Union from yesterday.
The United States, with this coalition effort, Muslim states, Sunni states, part of that effort will ultimately not only degrade this capability, with ISIL, but destroy ISIL itself, because it really stands for nothing. We're using our unique capabilities, air power, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and our training ability to make sure that Iraqi forces on one side and Syrian opposition forces on the other side of the border can take the fight to ISIL.
Scott, there was a phrase in there, our training ability. Now have we suddenly had mission creep into we need to once again train the Iraqis? I thought we just did that a couple of years ago.
Well, once again, it's kind of two ways. Special Forces mission is to train, advise, and assist. So there is a bit of equipping in there. They're making them capable. And what we saw the failure with the Iraqi army was the leadership. The leadership fled, thus the soldiers had no direction to go. So I think, yes, initially there is a bit of a training, and that's naturally what Special Forces does. You don't need 5,000 infantry soldiers to train a few thousand Peshmerga Guard either, though.
Well, there's one other thing I'd like to ask you about, because obviously the involvement of the Arab nations is going to be key. The New York Times reporting this morning, the headline reads, Arab nations offer to fight ISIS from the air. Does anybody want to engage ISIS on the ground?
I really don't believe anybody has an appetite to. You just see so much confusion, misstatements, stepping back. They show pictures of people having meetings, but in result, there's only a small handful of special forces in there right now, and there's no plan, for how to bolster that engagement. It's definitely not going to be the Arab states. They do not want to be seen on the ground fighting other Arabs.
And there's also concern about weapons ending up in the wrong hands. Some of the truths in life are first spoken in jest, such as in the case of comedian Seth Meyers, who said basically, it's good to know who we are arming now so we know who will be fighting 10 years from now.
Well, I think so. And that's always, an issue. These light arms that they've been provided. Now, remember, a lot of those early maneuvers by ISIS into Iraq were against military garrisons. And when they fled, they basically scooped up everything they could and they shipped it back into Syria. So there isn't a lot of, medium military hardware left in Iraq. In the northern area, it all went back to Syria.
Scott, Pope Francis spoke out on the troubling world situation. He said, and I don't want to misquote him, but I think the paraphrase would be almost in segments, it appears that World War III has begun. Do you share the assessment of the pontiff?
Well, I don't believe it's World War III in the sense of what World War II was with Clash of Nations, but it is World War III in a clash of ideas on the basis of what civilization is, on how, grievances are solved around the world. And right now we find ourselves with no counter narrative to extremist Islam, none, other than us complaining occasionally and maybe a soundbite. We really don't have a counter to what's being put in front of us today.
Scott, meanwhile, the president did authorize U.S. troops, but not to Iraq or Syria, but rather to West Africa to battle Ebola. Is this the right use of our forces?
About a minute left, Scott.
Yeah, I don't really believe that it is. That there really is a clear and present danger right now that just attacks us all in our fundamental, world. And that's ISIS, and that's in Syria and Iraq.
Well, we will see what transpires. Scott Neal, as always, for the role you played in Special Forces, for the role you continue to play as you join us with your insights on this, we thank you very, very much. We will be calling on you again, obviously. Now, to hear what Scott had to say and to hear what the Pope had to say over the weekend, it's not a pretty picture.
No.
Want to get your take on it. Yes, it is terrifying. Has World War III begun, albeit not like what we saw with the previous two global conflicts? Why don't you tweet us your comments at NewsmaxTV, hashtag America's Forum. You can also visit us, newsmaxtv.com/comment and facebook.com/Newsmax. America's Forum continues after this.